Today we are looking at a case from the second part of the 19th century, so sit back as we go to the USA. Mary Kelly was born in 1854. Her mother died while she was still young, and her father was placed in a soldier's home at Dayton. As a result, Mary was sent to live with an uncle and aunt who cared for her well and ensured that she received a good education. She was a bright child, and when she was 16 years old, she was described as a young lady of pleasing appearance and intelligent manner. Once she had finished her schooling, her prospects seemed favourable, and there was every expectation that she might settle comfortably and make a respectable life for herself. However, under the persuasion of her uncle, she entered into a marriage with a man named David Lawson, and the marriage soon proved to be disastrous. Her husband, by all accounts, was a drunken and worthless man, and his behaviour made her situation increasingly difficult to endure. What may at first been overcome with patience gradually became intolerable, and she found relief only when he was sent to prison, leaving her with little choice but to separate from him. They had one child together, but tragically the baby died, and the loss only deepened the unhappiness of an already troubled marriage. By 1873, she had managed to find employment in domestic service in the city of Columbus in Ohio. A year later, in 1874, she met a man named Charles Armagill. He was quite charming and came across as polite and self-possessed, the sort of person who might easily gain the confidence of others. He was born on the 11th of May 1850 in Athens, Ohio, and received a common school education before going on to attend Ohio University. His time there, however, was cut short by the death of his father, which forced him to leave his studies and seek employment in order to help support his mother, a woman regarded by those who knew her as thoroughly respectable. In search of work, he went to Columbus, where he learned the trade of a wood finisher. He was one of 9 children, 7 boys and 2 girls, and as they all grew older, the family gradually dispersed across the state in search of better opportunities, settling in places such as Cincinnati and Cleveland. It was in Columbus that Charles married and became a father. At the time, he was generally considered by those around him to be a fine and industrious man, living a respectable life. However, that changed on the day he went out with a friend named Elliot Heimrod. While the 2 men stood together, 2 young women passed by. Mr. Heimrod suggested they follow them, and Charles agreed. It was a decision made without much thought, but it was one that had great consequences for Charles. One of the young women was Mary Kelly, and Charles very quickly became infatuated with her. Although he had a home in Columbus, a wife, and a child, they soon began to feel like a burden to him. His feelings for Mary were such that over time they overcame his sense of responsibility. He abandoned his family and persuaded Mary to leave her position in domestic service and travel with him to Toledo. Once there, despite their best efforts, they were unable to find regular work, so decided to see if things were better in Cleveland. Although they were not married, they lived together and told anyone who asked that they were husband and wife. However, their life together was not without problems. Just as in Toledo, neither Charles or Mary were able to find regular employment, and money was scarce. Their circumstances became so bad that they lived in a very impoverished way, and at times went without food. Although Charles had once hoped to provide Mary with a respectable and comfortable life, their situation was growing increasingly more desperate. In the absence of any other means of support, Mary turned to prostitution, and Charles came to rely on what she earned. This arrangement, born out of necessity, gradually placed a heavy strain on their relationship. It was a source of shame to him and of hardship to her, and over time it became a source of growing tension between them. Eventually, following an angry quarrel, Mary left him. She did not tell him where she was going, and Charles, now with no options, returned to his childhood home and again began to live with his mother. However, he found it very difficult to live without Mary and decided that he must find her. Over the following weeks, he searched for her. He wrote letters to different cities, Cleveland, Cincinnati, and Columbus, trying to trace her, but all of these efforts failed. The letters were returned, and each failure deepened his frustration. He believed that she may be in Cleveland, so once all his letters had been returned, he focused his attentions there. He borrowed money from his mother and travelled to the city, desperately looking for Mary. After 4 weeks of searching, he saw her outside the post office. She was in the company of another woman. so he followed her at a distance as they walked along Broadway near the Central Market. After a while, he approached her and asked her how she had been. However, Mary did not want to speak to him and went into a saloon in an attempt to get away. After searching for so long, Charles was not about to give up. He had been weeks searching for her, so followed her and tried to persuade her to speak to him, if only for a few minutes. Eventually she agreed, and they went into a quieter part of the saloon. Somewhat inevitably, the conversation soon grew heated. They started to argue, at first over the returned letters, and then over the way Mary said that Charles had treated her. She told him that not only had he treated her badly, he had also exposed her past to her relatives. The argument became so loud that the proprietor of the saloon intervened and warned them both to keep quiet. Now speaking in a more cordial manner, Charles again tried to persuade Mary to return to him. He told her that they could go to Fort Wayne together, that he would find work on the railroad, and promised that he would be kind to her and make sure that she had everything she needed. Mary, however, once again told him that she would not go back to him. He then asked if she would at least return to Columbus, but again she told him that she would not. Looking straight at him, she said that it was too late, and after everything that had happened between them, there was no going back. She told him that all he could do was leave her alone. She then left the saloon with her companion, while Charles remained behind. He was both angry and upset, but he did not abandon his efforts to win her back. Later that night he went to the house where she was living at number 100 Cross Street, and he soon realized that it was a house of ill repute. He told her that he had nowhere else to go, and asked if he could stay there for just one night, and promised to go in the morning. Mary reluctantly agreed. Over the next few hours they spoke. Charles did not shout or get angry. He remained calm and spoke in a soft voice, even though all he wanted was for her to return to him. When he woke up the following day, he urged her to pack her things and leave with him, but again she refused, just as she had before. At last, believing he had no further chance, he took her hand, said goodbye, and left. However, he did not leave Cleveland and returned to Mary's living quarters later that same day. He found Mary and asked her for $5 so he could return to Columbus. He told her that he had fallen on hard times and that his mother had given him money to buy clothes and travel to Cleveland. But not only had he spent it, he claimed that he had also pawned his coat and everything else that he could spare. He said he cared deeply for her and would rather die than lose her. By now, something in his mind had changed. He had spent weeks searching for Mary, and now that he had found her, he could not accept her refusal. She told him that they could talk in her room, and together they went upstairs. Mary once more told him that she would not go anywhere with him. She reminded him of the hardship they had endured together, and that as he had not worked, she had to go onto the streets in order for them to survive. She told him that she had been living in her current room for 5 weeks, and was earning more than she ever had before. She also told him of the gifts she had received. She said that one gentleman had given her $15, of which he had spent $13 on a new dress, and insisted that her life was good and that she had no intention of leaving. For Charles, this was more than he could bear. Mary's words made him feel neglected, and he did not think that she really understood the life she was now living. He told her what she was doing would make her aunt and grandmother very ashamed. Mary, however, just ignored his comments, and they continued to lie on the bed. As he was not being aggressive, she believed that he now understood the situation and would soon go. Then he placed his hand beneath her head, and she turned slightly away from him. At that moment, he took a revolver from his pocket and fired. Mary screamed, and Charles said, "Forgive me," and fired again and again until there were no more bullets left. Mary had been shot in the head and the face, and she was not moving, but Charles calmly reloaded the revolver, and after moving Mary's arm to the side, he fired again, this time aiming for her heart. The shots were fired from such a close range that the powder set fire to her dress, and twice Charles had to extinguish the flames with his hand. When he had fired all the shots, he threw down the revolver and went downstairs. He asked for water to wash himself and told those present to send for the police. He appeared calm, even composed, but when no officer arrived, he went out onto the street to look for one. He walked to the corner of the road, but as there was no policeman in the vicinity, he returned to the house, went back upstairs, and kissed Mary, which stained his face with blood. When a policeman finally arrived, Charles surrendered without resistance. He admitted what he had done, and said that the only thing he regretted was the sorrow that it would bring to his mother. He told the officer that he had a good home in Athens and many friends. Speaking in a clear voice, he said that he was not sorry for killing Mary and would do it again if necessary. After wiping the sweat from his face and continuing to smoke a cigar, he looked at the officer and said, "There is one more thing I want to ensure, and that is that she is buried decently. I have enough money for that, and she shall not be stowed away in a pauper's grave if I can help it." Charles Magill was then arrested and charged with murder. The inquest began on Monday the 3rd of December and was held at the Central Station under the direction of Coroner Fleidner. The principal witness was a young woman named Mary Campbell. She told the jury that she had known Miss Kelly for 3 weeks and that on both the 1st and 2nd of December she had seen her in the company of Mr. Magill. When asked how he appeared, Miss Campbell replied that he seemed to be very calm. She said that on the Sunday evening she heard a noise come from Mary's room, so went up to see what was taking place. She said that the door was unlocked, so she opened it and saw that Mr. Magill was holding a revolver and Mary was screaming. She told the jury that this made her very frightened, so she ran back down the stairs and went in search of a policeman. This testimony was confirmed by Miss Laura Lane, who was the owner of the business that operated from 100 Cross Street. Doctors Adams and Sacrida were the next witnesses. They told the inquest that they had conducted a post-mortem and had found that the victim had been shot 11 times. When Mr. Magill gave testimony, he said that he was 27 years old and that the woman he had killed was 24. He admitted that he had a wife and child in Columbus and stated that Mary Kelly had been the cause of their separation. He then went over the events of the day and appeared deeply affected as he spoke. He said that he loved Mary with all his heart, and after he had killed her, he hugged and kissed her again and again. He added that on the Saturday afternoon, she had asked for 50 cents, which he gave her as she wanted to buy some ribbons because she had an appointment with a man. Looking at the coroner, he said that he knew what that meant, and it made him feel very bad. When the inquest ended, Charles Magill was found guilty of willful murder and committed to stand trial. Newspapers followed the case closely, publishing detailed accounts of Mr. Magill's background. They tracked down his wife and described her as a neat and respectable-looking woman, and reported that 2 of his brothers had at various times been imprisoned, details clearly intending to cast a shadow over the family. On the 2nd of January 1878, Charles's mother visited him in his cell in what was described as a deeply moving reunion. Witnesses noted the evident strain it had placed upon her. When she left the prison, she was visibly distressed and told reporters that she was shocked by what her son had done. Though she admitted he could at times be somewhat wild, she insisted that never before had he shown any signs of violence. While awaiting trial, Charles's behaviour became quite erratic. He complained of headaches and spoke of meeting Mary at night. He described dreams and visions in which he walked with her into strange places, filled with people dressed in white. On one occasion, he even produced a blood-stained handkerchief, which he claimed had been used by her. The trial eventually began on the 19th of February 1878, before Judge McMath. Charles was defended by S.E. Adams and W.M. Robinson, and the prosecution was represented by John S. Hutchins and 2 assistants. Nearly 3 days were spent selecting a jury of 12 men. When the proceedings eventually began, despite previously admitting to killing Mary, Charles pleaded not guilty due to insanity. His defense introduced evidence that he had suffered from sleepwalking and had received blows to the head in his childhood. They claimed that he would accompany his family to church on Sundays, and that on occasions he would fall asleep during the service and begin to sleepwalk. Witnesses were presented, some who had known Charles since he was a child, and all confirmed that he suffered from sleepwalking. The defence also produced witnesses who had seen Charles get beaten up by 2 policemen in August 1877, and it was claimed that this beating had seriously affected his brain and his mental state. In order to support the insanity claim, the defence called Dr. E. H. Peck, who had visited Mr. Magill several times while he was in prison and had closely observed his manner and conduct. The doctor said that on each occasion, Charles's behaviour struck him as somewhat peculiar and was not entirely consistent with that of a rational man. However, when Dr. Peck was asked directly whether in his professional opinion he believed Mr. Magill to be insane, the prosecution immediately objected, and the judge upheld the objection, refusing to allow the question to be answered before the jury. The defence also stated that Charles had not originally intended to kill Mary, but rather to take his own life. They said that he believed that by doing so, Mary would suddenly come to understand her situation and turn away from the life she was leading, a life that Charles regarded to be immoral. After nearly a week of testimony and argument, the final witnesses were heard. Counsel on each side then addressed the jury at length, reviewing the facts and pressing their respective interpretations of Mr. Magill's actions and state of mind. The judge then summed up the case, carefully outlining the law as it applied, and to the question of insanity. The jury retired to deliberate, and did so for 6 hours, before returning to the courtroom with a verdict of guilty of murder in the first degree. Following this, Judge McMath sentenced Charles Magill to death and made the 28th of June 1878 as a date in which the sentence was to be carried out. There were efforts to overturn the verdict, and although at first these were denied, eventually a new trial was agreed by the Supreme Court due to a technicality that had occurred in the first trial. Once again the evidence was reviewed, and once again the defence attempted to establish an insanity plea. However, the outcome did not change. Charles was again found guilty, and again sentenced to death. As the date of his execution approached, there were more appeals for clemency. A delegation from Cleveland urged the governor to commute the sentence to life imprisonment, but ultimately, all these efforts failed. On Thursday the 13th of February 1879, Charles Armagill was led to the gallows. His final words were, "Don't make any mistake on that rope." He was then hanged. Hello everyone, and thank you so much for listening. As usual, please leave any comments or feedback you may have, and I hope to see you all again in the next brief case.